Welcome to your virtual event. Before we get started, we'll walk you through the features of our webinar platform so you have a seamless experience. This button allows you to turn the audio on and off. Please note, by default, the button will be toggled to mute, so you'll need to turn it on at the start of the session. If you'd like to proceed with closed captioning, click here. During the presentation, you can interact with the hosts and panelists using the chat feature. When it's time for Q&A, engage with speakers by typing your questions into this window. You may be asked to participate in a live poll during the discussion. Once the question is presented, you can share your thoughts by selecting the response that aligns with how you feel. When the session is over, click here to exit. At the end of the webinar, we would appreciate your feedback on how the session went. We hope this was helpful. Now enjoy today's event, which will begin shortly.
Greetings. I'd like to welcome everyone in our audience today. We are very grateful that you have chosen to share some of your busy day with us. We know your time is valuable, and we will honor that day with what I'm confident will be an engaging discussion. Once again, our topic today is New Year, New Agents, how GenAI will transform insurance in 2025. Our sponsor is NTT Data, and my name is Mike Sisk. I will be your moderator today, and I am very pleased to introduce our two speakers today. Here they are. Tim Stabler is Managing Director of Global AI at NTT Data. Tim brings over 16 years of experience in leveraging AI to deliver value for Fortune 500 clients. Prior to joining NTT Data, he held various AI leadership positions in consulting at Deloitte and Slalom. His early career as an actuary provided a strong foundation for his journey across finance and insurance. In addition to his professional endeavors, Tim has served as an associate faculty member at Columbia University. And we are delighted to have Tim with us here today. And joining him is Aaron Wright, a Director of Strategy at Ernix. Aaron is a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society with over 20 years of P&C actuarial experience. Utilizing his insurance expertise, Aaron sets company strategy and works with global insurance companies to modernize their insurance technology stack. Prior to joining Ernix, he worked in a variety of insurance executive roles, including pricing, state management, catastrophe management, insurance transformation, and leading a modeling center of excellence. And also honored to have Aaron with us here today as well. Looking forward to a discussion. And just a quick housekeeping note that we do have time for Q&A. You can put your question into the console here throughout the hour as a question occurs to you. So please, as that idea pops into your head, please get that in the console. We very much want to hear from you. If we don't get to a question you've asked today, we'll definitely follow up after the program. So, please ask away. Now, I would like to, I'm going to move on to this next slide here and set us up for our discussion. So before we drill down into GenAI agents, we wanted to start our discussion today with an update on the state of the insurance industry. And I understand that NTT Data has conducted some extensive research on GenAI investment trends for the coming years. And as you see here, was an interesting data point regarding the expected jump in insurance industry investment specifically. So, Tim, let me ask you, can you tell us a little more about what's happening with GenAI efforts in the insurance industry, where time, money, and effort has been focused so far, and where the increasing investments is likely to be directed in the coming year?
Yes, thank you, Mike. So just to talk about the study that we did shortly, before kind of releasing some of the global GenAI report, we actually polled about 2,300 global leaders, both from the business side and the IT side, just to get a sense kind of in the market where they were in the GenAI space. I think this metric really highlights one of the kind of big findings we have from the global GenAI report, which is, essentially, as we've seen with a lot of our clients, POCs have been done, especially in the insurance sector, across a lot of organizations over the last kind of two plus years. But what you're seeing now is a jump to something much more, getting into production and getting into the actual business process space. where organizations are actually trying to allocate budgets to actually invest more holistically and more formally in Gen AI as actually kind of part of the actual everyday business processes that you see in insurance.
Excellent. And what do we mean by Gen AI agents?
So what we've seen in the AI space is a leap from what I think most individuals are used to now, which is kind of a question response mode of AI, right? So I can ask a question and I get a response back. With GenAI agents, we're actually moving into something much more robust, right? So now I can actually have AI agents, which are essentially software that can go complete a task or a series of tasks for me, right? So the number of use cases that you can actually impact, right, in an insurance process, whether that's claims or underwriting, right, is exponential versus just kind of the Q&A response type format that you've seen with AI over the last couple of years. And so that's why you kind of hear agents in the news now, and especially you're starting to see it more and more in insurance. And we're already seeing some use cases in the market along those lines, right? So everything from, your contact center space of being able to use generative AI agents almost as kind of an AI concierge, right? To have a better summary that's automatically popping up. But also I can have an end user actually trigger an agent to go do a task. So a task could be as simple as uploading or updating a row of data to actually something much more complex in terms of actually drafting a follow-up task or even making a call. And so you're starting to see that, these use cases actually kind of exponentially develop. And a lot of organizations are kind of still figuring out within the business process, where do they fit in, given a lot of these processes have existed long before GenAI agents existed.
Interesting. So Tim, can you give some examples of Gen AI agents being implemented in insurance?
Yeah, so I think we've seen them in a few spaces, I think, to start with, right? So one is in the claims process, right? So typically in the claims process, there can be, historically kind of a lot of manual activities that take place. So we've seen it anything on, the ingestion side of the house of, we have all this complex unstructured data that typically folks have to manually pull out and kind of search and retrieve. And so now I can have generative AI ingest that, and then I can automatically have certain triggers in place that enable it to go complete something in the claims process for you. Something as simple as a review all the way through kind of the full claims adjudication process. So that's kind of one big area where we've seen kind of agentic workflows really come to market. The other side is on, as I mentioned, on the contact center side, where having the right information from a customer as part of that contact center support, but actually taking some of the lift off the manual activities and actually having agents actually help through a digital channel actually complete whatever the request is needed from the policyholder or someone calling about a claim. Right. So instead of having to, call someone and having those activities kind of manually completed, now you're kind of keeping it in a digital channel, and it's more than just a Q&A chatbot. You're actually having the entire process completed by the agent.
Interesting. Great examples. Aaron, let me loop you in here. So should insurers get started with all of these sort of possibilities at once, or how should they get going?
Yeah, good question. So there's a lot of potential out there, but I think the place that we really should start is mapping out our processes and our decision points, understanding the importance and really the risk that each of the decisions and processes can bring. We in insurance really are in a highly regulated industry, but luckily, if we understand anything, it is risk. So we need to understand our own risk tolerance, our confidence in the AI models that we're building, and then find a path towards improvement that's really within our capacity to risk. Now, once you've understood what's there as far as the process and the decision points, the things within your processes and your workflow that lend themselves well to AI agents, you need to also understand what type of data you have in the background for each decision point. Because though that data is going to be the input into your model building process.
Thank you, Aaron. And Tim, so what do you think is a practical first step to pilot GenAI agents in a high impact area like claims management?
Well, I think just kind of building off what Aaron said, I think, the good thing and the bad thing about GenAI agents is it's kind of a hammer with 1,000 nails, right? And so what I don't think we want to do is just, try to figure out where we can stick a GenAI agent in, right? I think it's better to go starting from the business process, in this case, the claims management process, and kind of work backwards from there. So just really, it's really a process mining activity, right? Just as the practical first step, just to break those components down and just kind of imagine if, this process was built pre-Gen AI, and then what if you had to build it today? Let's just kind of break down that process and then figure out where it actually makes practical sense for Gen AI agents to be part of that process. And it may be, the whole thing, it may just be pieces of it, right? But just kind of thinking from that mindset versus just trying to automatically fit it in, I think was a more successful approach.
And what about factors that insurers should consider when building a roadmap to scale GenAI agent solutions across multiple departments? Any insights there?
Yeah, I think a lot of the holistic solutions will typically involve more than one department, right? So I think one, making sure everyone understands the real business value starting out versus just the technology side, right? So you kind of want to have an embedded AI team with the business teams across departments, so everyone's kind of speaking the same language, right? So I think that's a key consideration, and that they're all, they're not working across kind of competing KPIs. They're all working towards the same holistic solution, even if it's kind of multi-towered across departments is where I would typically start.
Yeah, let me just also add, so when we're talking about going across departments, I had said before, it's important to understand, the decision points within the different business processes you're looking at. Typically, you're going to start somewhere, and you're going to start and look at the potential AOI, ROI of the improvement decisions, or the efficiency and the expertise of your staff and the data that you have available. You're going to get some value out of your initial project. Now, after you've had some success, you're going to notice that you're building champions within those various department leadership teams, and those success stories are going to spread across your departments. So leading to kind of wider decision point analysis that you can do across, more options for you to look at in the future for better risk and reward areas to tackle next. Really, it is a case where success does breed success.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. All right, let's dig into the challenges a little bit here. So, Aaron, what do you see as the top challenges?
Oh, top challenges. There's a bunch. There's a bunch that people need to consider. Let me just name a couple, and I'm sure if I miss something that's important, Tim will jump in as well. But first and foremost, I'd say data quality and data availability, right? Because GenAI agents rely heavily on high quality and relevant data, both for training and just to function. If the data is biased or incomplete, if it's poorly formatted, all that can lead to ineffective or even harmful outputs coming through. I would say, additionally, integration with existing systems, that last mile problem that we always talk about in data science is definitely a big thing. GenAI agents have to be integrated into existing workflows, systems, processes, and typically tie into legacy software. And those tie-ins can be complex and sometimes resource intensive. When I mentioned the last mile problem before, really what we're talking about is that the challenge or the difficulty associated with taking data-driven insights and translating them into more actionable decisions and outcomes within an organization. So when we're talking about the last mile problem, we're talking about emphasizing that final step of that pipeline, which is where we're actually taking these findings and getting value with the end users. So integration with existing systems and processes that people have to use, that is typically a challenge that people have. And just last, I'll mention cultural resistance. And employees really can resist the adaptation and the adoption of Gen AI and technology due to fears of sometimes job displacement or even just discomfort with the new technologies. It can be seen as a black box, and it cannot have proper explanation. And so they can look at it and say, this just doesn't make sense to me. And if you're not getting that kind of buy-in from your own people, then that resistance can kill a project pretty fast.
A few just to just kind of follow on points, just to add to what Aaron said. I think one, on the data quality availability piece, that's a big one that always comes up when we build out these use cases. I think in part because a lot of these processes, and especially in the insurance space, they rely on data, but not just data that you kind of see in a spreadsheet, but also tacit knowledge from whoever's been doing that process for a long time. And so that tacit knowledge isn't always written down, or that person may know something that doesn't show up in a spreadsheet, right? And so given that agents are actually impacting a process, directly with a specific task, it's really, really important to understand that and try to collect that information and fill in gaps, which you can do as part of building out agentic use cases, but that's kind of an important one that you don't want to skip over. I think the other piece that Aaron mentioned is a big one, is around embedding it with existing or even legacy systems, right? And so one of the things that's changed about AI over the last couple of years really is the much more kind of integrated user experience from a kind of human-centered design perspective. And so right, integrating this in someone's day job, right, even if it's in the back end, right, takes a level of care and kind of design thinking. It's not necessarily as kind of simple as just embedding it with an API and kind of turning it on. I think building a really integrated experience is where we've seen really the big kind of ROI come into play.
Yeah, if you're building some sort of an agent that is, answering good questions, that it's providing you providing you a code or other things like that, but it's hard for your people to use it and bring it into what they're doing, they're not even going to use it.
Excellent. Thank you both. And that actually brings us to our first polling question, a straight up kind of a yes or no question here. So the question is your data quality holding you back from implementing Gen AI solutions? And I'm just going to put this up for you to make your selection here. It would be really wonderful if everyone can contribute to the to our poll here. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for participating in that poll. Really appreciate it. And let's move on with our discussion here. Aaron, let me ask you, how can insurers overcome common challenges such as the data quality issues and employee adoption that you just mentioned during a Gen AI agent implementation?
Yeah, good question. So let me start with just employee adoption. So I ran a data science team at an insurance company for a while. And I remember when my team, and this was years ago, was working to build several models to automate some underwriting tasks that had previously been done manually. And that underwriting team, I'll tell you, was very skeptical that the computer could match their decades of experience in underwriting. So what we finally did is we borrowed some of their best line underwriters to help consult in the build and the testing of our models. Those line underwriters suggested data that we'd need. They pointed out interactions that we should consider. They talked about edge cases that we may not want to have, a model or an AI in the decision-making process. And of course, they were very involved in the testing and iteration process, so that at the end, when we had something that was really enhancing what those underwriters were able to do. It made it so that these line underwriters that had been involved and working with my data scientists the whole time were my biggest advocates. And they took that then back to their peers and were able to drum up support. And so then the rollout went much better because it was not just some outside group of data scientists or eggheads going in there and saying, here's what you have to do, or here's what you're going to be using going forwards. It was their own peers that were saying, hey, I use this, and it was amazing. You asked about data quality as well. So data quality is always going to be an issue. If you're going to wait for the perfect data, then you'll never stop waiting. Now, that said, data quality really only becomes an issue if you can't adjust for it, or your data scientist can't adjust for it, or if it's inconsistent, or the modeling process isn't able to pull enough signal out of the noise. But I would say don't use imperfect data as an excuse not to test your model quality that you can build. You need to look at it and see what value you can get. Now, of course, don't use that as an excuse to not continue to improve your data quality, but you're never going to have perfect data. And so you need to really pull together what you have now and look and see how much signal, how much value you can get out of what you have now to see how much benefit you can get out of what's there. And if it's not there, then work on it a bit more to improve your data quality.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. So Tim, let me put you on the spot here a little bit. So how do we deal with these data quality issues?
So there's a couple things we kind of think through. So from a checks and balances perspective, right, you actually can build in to your GenAI agentic applications, essentially feedback loops on data quality. So that means things like directly building in data lineage. So if I understand I'm pulling back a data point, I can pull back explicitly where it is, right? So it came from page 37, paragraph 3 of this PDF, for example. You can get very explicit. So that's kind of one mechanism we can build in, right? We can also build in a reasoning mechanism. So we're having the AI generate a response or an answer or do a task, but I'm also, as part of the feedback, getting reasoning. So I'm having generative AI create the reasoning. So essentially the steps it took to complete this task or process is part of what it's doing in the back end, right? So a human can actually see that. One of the things we see is actually AI is a good way to actually find out what data quality issues you might have, because it's typically kind of bubble to the surface as you kind of roll out these applications, right? So it's been a good feedback loop for data governance teams, and I think a lot of organizations have kind of highlighted where some of the data gaps are, right? Some of the things that may have been around for years, or some things they didn't even know about, because you're bubbling some of this data to the surface in a much more seamless way, where before it may have been, the data quality issues already existed, but was a little bit more hidden in the past.
Interesting. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. So let's pivot a little bit the conversation, and I'd like to get a little bit into the kind of the ethical and regulatory considerations. This is something that comes up a lot with GenAI. So, Aaron, let me go to you first, but please, Tim, chime in. So, what are some best practices for collaborating with AI experts to ensure ethical and secure implementation of GenAI agents?
So some companies are going to have internal AI experts that lead initiatives, and others are not going to have that expertise inside, and they're going to be working with external experts. Now, whether it's internal or external, I think either way, it's really important that we work well with these experts, because once again, we are in a highly regulated industry. These AI experts can help guide the process and ensure that what you deploy is going to adhere to strict security, privacy, compliance, all those standards that our industry demands. So you asked for best practices in working with these types of AI experts. I can think off the top of my head of kind of 5 different things. So let me just go through some of those. So first of all, it's really important to clearly define your objectives and your scope. You have to set those clear goals and establish both what it is that you're expecting out from this AI project, what success actually looks like, so that you know what you're building and what you're not. It's easy to have scope creep and have this thing get out of proportion, or be too narrow and not bring the value that you first promised. Second, you need to make sure that you're working with the right experts. You need to, whether it's hiring internally or choosing the right partners, evaluate them based on their experience, their skill sets, their track record, and make sure that they understand the industry that we're in, because the insurance industry is a bit different than some of the other ones that are out there. Third, I would say make sure that you are involving your internal stakeholders. You have to involve your key internal stakeholders from the relevant departments. If you don't, then you're having some blind spots. And really keeping those AI experts, keeping those business SMEs tied at the hip, they are able to see things together that separately they're not able to see. I was told a story by an underwriting executive that I used to work with about his prior company, how they hired a data scientist. I think he even said it was somebody straight out of school, who knows, but they hired this data scientist to build them a model, and from what he told me, it was an absolute disaster. The data scientist knew nothing about insurance, and their results definitely showed it. If they had just consulted with one business SME like one time, some of these obvious errors of the variables or the relationships that they had pulled through would have been caught really early on. My friend told me that that project at that company was a complete failure, and it actually hurt their the likelihood that they would do this again, because at the time they said all of a sudden their business experts were very distrustful of, I'll say, analytics in general, not just AI or models or anything like that. I said 5 things. Let's see. Fourth, we talk about ethics and compliance. It's really important that as you're working with these AI experts, you're stating right up front that these are of high importance to you, that you are making sure that these AI experts understand what types of ethical considerations there need to be, whether it's in fairness or transparency, accountability, and that they're able to teach you, to show you what they're doing to make sure that they're putting your mind at ease about what has to be put in place. And that, I say ethical, but really includes regulatory as well, right? Making sure that we're complying with relevant laws and regulations, such as data privacy or security or things like that. The last thing that I'll mention is really around documentation. And this is just because I'm a conservative person, but I'll tell you it helps. I would say document everything. Keep detailed records of your project plans, of the decisions, of the processes you went through, the outcomes that came from it. And this is going to help you both document your lessons learned to help you in the future, help you understand how you got to where you are today with the current solution, and then let you tweak it as time goes on, really having an understanding of how you got from A to B, and be able to recreate the magic in the future. Tim, I said a bunch of things. What did I miss?
No, I think that's a great list, Aaron. I think more just kind of just to add on to your bullet points there. I think 2 things. One, we're a big fan of saying, AI is a tool, not a rule, right? So when we think about like a complex process like underwriting, right? I think, it's obviously going to make folks nervous, right? Underwriters nervous that, AI is essentially making the rules, right? But really we want to make sure we're kind of in full ownership mode of that, right? So these are meant to be, even though it's complex AI and agents may be doing tasks in the background, we still want to make sure when we set up that process, right, we're treating these AIs as tools and not rules for the process, right? So that's kind of one big point. I think the other point that you hit on, but I'll just add to, is oftentimes when these projects the implementation goes in a direction that you may not want it to, especially in kind of a regulatory, ethical, security framework. I think a lot of that's driven by what we call kind of translation errors, right? So AI SMEs and the insurance SMEs may not be talking the same language. And that can happen, in this case, because, my analogy often is, if I were to, try to teach somebody how to throw a baseball, you can't just like write down in bullet points, here's how to throw a baseball, and someone just understands that, right? You really have to show them. And in showing an AI SME that process that hasn't lived it for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, can be complicated. But it is really, really important to make sure that that full process is shown on both sides, so that the business process is like extreme transparency, but also on the AI side, so the AI SME is showing kind of extreme transparency and kind of breaking down in business language exactly what these AI agents are doing, right? Otherwise, you kind of run into, well, I told you how to do this process, but you're really kind of writing down the steps to throw a baseball, which, it's not going to lead to a great result at the end of the day.
Make me want to go grab my mitt and go outside. If it wasn't
Yeah,
snowing, I
yeah.
probably would after this.
It's almost time for pitchers and catchers. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. And that brings us actually to our second polling question, everyone. So the question is coming up is, what is the biggest ethical or regulatory challenge you anticipate in implementing GenAI solutions? And again, hopefully everyone can just take a moment to weigh in on this poll. I'm going to put it up right now. All right, excellent. Thank you for participating in that second poll. Really appreciate it. So let's just continue with this ethical train of thought a little bit further, Aaron. So what are kind of the potential ethical and regulatory challenges that insurers might face when implementing Gen AI agents, and how might they mitigate those challenges?
I don't know if it makes me nervous or not that you think of ethics and you immediately turn to me, but maybe that's a good thing. I'll just take it as a good thing. But all right, so first let me say, thank you. I appreciate it. Let me say first that work with your AI experts on your specific use case. So I won't be able to tell you every potential ethical or regulatory challenge that you're going to face because they're changing, and because I'm not going to know your specific use case. But what I think I can talk about today is just give a couple examples of potential challenges and ways that we can mitigate them. So the first big one I'll mention is really around bias and discrimination. There's all sorts of stuff in the news about this. We know that AI in general and Gen AI and agents, they can inadvertently perpetuate biases found in training data. They can potentially even lead to discriminatory practices. So as mitigation, we need to be doing things such as conducting regular audits of our AI algorithms, looking for bias, implementing, I'll say, diverse training data sets to make sure they're trained on the right things and that we can get rid of the bias that's within our training data sets. We need to also, I'd say, from the business side, develop fairness guidelines and really ensure that the outcomes that are coming out of this are equitably treating all of our customers the way that we want, or the answers we're giving internally, depending on what the usage for that Gen AI agent is. The second ethical, I guess, challenge that I'll talk about is around data privacy. And we've mentioned it a couple of times in some of our answers before this. Handling personal data really does raise concerns about user privacy and compliance to make sure that we are, keeping up with the data protection regulations that are out there. We have to have robust data governance policies. We have to anonymize sensitive data. We have to ensure that we are in compliance with regulations such as GDPR or what is that, General Data Protection Regulation that they have in the EU, or California has what, CCPA. So there are there are consumer privacy acts out there, and this is always something on regulators' minds. So we need to stay up with what the regulation is and make sure that what we're doing and the data we're using, because data is the lifeblood of these AI agents, is actually being used the right way in their development. One other thing I guess I'll mention around regulation is that accountability can sometimes be a bit cloudy if we're not careful. So determining kind of responsibility in situations where the GenAI agent is making some sort of a decision can complicate the accountability we have internally. And I know Tim talked a little bit before about keeping humans in the loop and whatnot, but it is important to clearly define responsibilities within our organization and establish guidelines for human oversight in automated processes. I've got a friend and a neighbor who's actually a pharmacist. And I was talking with him just last week about what he does in his job. And part of it is that he works for a hospital where him and some other pharmacists that are senior and have really done what they've been doing for a long time, their job is to review all the prescriptions from doctors that have been for the whole region. And so his hospital actually has an AI in the background, an AI agent that helps identify and find problems. But what he told me is he said, this AI enhances, maybe extends my capabilities, but at the end of the day, he's the one responsible for keeping patients safe. So we have to make sure that our people, as they're using these AI agents, yes, we want them to be enhanced and have their capabilities extended, but we can't have a situation where somebody's saying, well, we just did it because the computer said to do so. We have to make sure that that responsibility is still very clear. Tim, anything I missed in that?
The only thing I'd add is just kind of you think about the implementation kind of life cycle of GenAI agents, right? I would just, assume a kind of longer testing phase than maybe you would see typically in the software space, right? Even if the development of the AI agent can be quick, depending on the use case, the testing phase and really simulating kind of real world scenarios as best you can, that's an important piece, especially when it comes to something new, like GenAI agents, right? So I think you kind of want to build that into your implementation just to make sure that you're not kind of, glancing over into the 4 points that Aaron made. And I think part of that just comes into play when you kind of roll something out to the real world, and inevitably, comes up with different scenarios you may not have thought of, right? And so there's different techniques to kind of think through, even in some case you could synthesize or simulate real world data if you don't have it. But just kind of thinking through those scenarios is important. Is an important piece of kind of you think about the traditional software development lifecycle, but think about it for GenAI agent a little bit differently because that testing phase may be a little bit longer.
That's a good point.
Interesting. Yeah. So Tim, when it comes to measuring success, what measurable outcomes should insurers be tracking to evaluate the success of their Gen AI agent initiatives, and how do you think they should adjust their strategy based on results?
Yeah, so I think it's important to kind of separate the measurable outcomes versus we'll call it like technology performance. And I'll give examples of both. When we talk about measurable outcomes, right, really the best Gen AI use cases, especially in the agent space, really directly impact an actual everyday business process, right? We talked about claims earlier. I think we gave some underwriting examples, but I think, for those, you don't really need to invent new KPIs, right? What we find is, anchor to the KPIs you have for that use case, and then think of a way to directly tie what the agent's doing and how it's actually going to impact that KPI. So if we're talking about contact centers, right? So things like, first call resolution, right? Promoter score, response time, average handle time, right? What's their actual, cost per contact, right? So those KPIs exist today, right? So we don't need to invent new KPIs just for GenAI agents. It's more around, okay, understanding what the process is today, how are GenAI agents altering that process, and I want to see an impact directly on what those KPIs are, right? So just thinking about it from truly, a business impact perspective. A lot of clients now, we work directly with them of how are GenAI agents actually going to impact directly their P&L, and we kind of work backwards from that versus the other way around, right? And so so we don't really need new KPIs, just to make it more complicated. We try to anchor to business KPIs that exist. And then when we're talking about kind of performance evaluation, that gets into more, we want to understand from a GenAI perspective, we want to understand those KPIs simply to understand whether they're actually going to impact the business outcome that we're trying to achieve. So if we want to understand from a technology perspective, something like latency, right? How long a response is coming back, right? Or task throughput for an agent. Did it complete this task or part of the task, all of it, right? We want to understand those KPIs, but really we want to understand those KPIs only in the aspect of how they're actually impacting the business outcome at the end of the day. Anything I missed, Aaron?
Yeah. Well, I just add that, and maybe this is already perfectly clear to everybody who's already listening to us talk here, but in the past when we've talked about GenAI, it's typically been discussions around kind of efficiency. And I think as this new world's moving forward with GenAI agents, it's more than just that. Yes, it's that as well, but as you were talking about, Tim, there are other actual real value that we can get out of improving results and not just looking for efficiencies.
Interesting. And so, Aaron, can I continue on that a little bit? What strategies can insurers use to sort of continually refine and optimize their Gen AI initiatives, based on their real world performance data?
Yeah, I think the first thing that, data is always near and dear to my heart. I think I've started answering multiple of your questions with data, because I think data is so integral to everything we're talking about here. So I'd say first, they really have to establish that data-driven culture. They have to ensure robust data collection mechanisms are in place to both gather the quantitative and the qualitative data metrics from their interactions, and they have to regularly analyze those metrics. Look at some of the things that Tim was talking about before: customer satisfaction, response times, resolution rates, all those things to identify trends, to look for areas of improvements. You're not going to be able to improve what you're not measuring. Now, of course, those lead into making sure that you have continuous feedback loops, soliciting feedback from the people that interact with your GenAI agent, whether it's from a customer or a business user side, as well as asking those experts that we have that are more aware of what is going on, so that they are monitoring what's happening. We need to use those experts to find out, are the answers that are coming back correct? Are they appropriate? Are they tying back to the right data? Are we missing certain segments? Are there patterns or potential issues that we have to define that will require attention and tweaking of those GenAI agents in specific areas? Tim also mentioned before that longer kind of ramp up time when it comes to putting these things into implementation or into production. I'd recommend A/B testing, side-by-side testing, experimentation, just really using some of those controlled experiments with different responses, features, service styles, allowing for the direct comparison of the effectiveness. And that's not just on the initial implementation. I'd say that should be best practice really going forward as these things are learning and growing and providing feedback, that you're occasionally going back to that to, as another data point to be able to understand how well it's working and where it needs to improve. Last thing I'll just mention is we've talked about humans in the process. When we're talking about things getting better, we have to have that human oversight. Involving our experts, our business experts in here, is going to be what really tells us whether or not the agent itself is maintaining the quality level that we want. And we've got experts in this field that maybe they can do just as well on a small scale as what we're trying to develop with the AI agent. and they're going to be the ones that tell us when something goes off the rail and where we need to actually put more work in to actually add additional data, train it on a subset or things like that to make sure that the knowledge base it's using and the responses and the actions and things like that are still in line with what it is that we want to do.
Excellent.
The only
Thank you,
thing
Aaron.
The only thing I'd add quickly is just kind of, just be pragmatic, right? Kind of take a very pragmatic approach. I think a lot of organizations are kind of thinking through kind of an innovator's dilemma, so to speak, of AI seems so fast moving. Do you invest in it now, or it could change in 6 months or change in 12 months? And I think it's kind of a almost an inverse of what we saw when this kind of new wave of GenAI was first released, where some were hesitant more because they're thinking, is this the next kind of dot-com bubble? Is it just kind of a fad, right? Or pick your analogy, right? But I think enough real world, everyday life examples have been out there in the market now, where now it's more around, organizations definitely want to invest. It's more around, how do you balance kind of, picking your right battles, so to speak. And so what we try to do is just take a very, very much pragmatic approach, right? And it's kind of, pick your kind of, AI principles, so to speak. And then, make sure you're kind of thinking through things in a very kind of modular, use case driven way, where as the technology changes, it's kind of easy to change you're not kind of anchored to a strategy that's outdated. It's easy to kind of plug and play and move along from that aspect. And there's AI that's been in place now for 2 years that it's working perfectly fine, right? As it is, right? So it's just because the technology moves, you still may not need to change it, right?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. And this actually brings us to our audience Q&A time. We've got, so just a reminder, if you've got something on your mind to ask Aaron or Tim, now is definitely the moment to get that question into the queue. But we do have some good ones here already queued up. So I think let's just jump right in. And Tim, let me throw the first one towards in your direction. Can you give me 2 specific use cases of where I should look to do this first?
Yeah, so I think just to kind of recap the efficiency angle that I think Aaron mentioned earlier, I think a lot of organizations have started specifically from kind of efficiency in mind, right? Whether that's something as simple as kind of knowledge management or on the data ingestion side. And so from there, that's kind of more of a horizontal capability. And so now when you get into specific use cases, it's more around where organizations feel like, one, they have like a specific kind of discrete measurable ROI that they can obtain, right? Because obviously they want to show value right away, right? And so, certain processes, especially in the contact center space that we mentioned earlier, right, are very well measured today. There's several KPIs on around those. The processes are actually measured from a time perspective, but also from a cost perspective. And so that's often where a lot of organizations have started, given it kind of lends itself to one, having data, whether it's from a knowledge article perspective or policyholders perspective, that's readily available, and it has specific tasks that AI agents have been able to prove in the market and in the industry to actually be able to accomplish, right? Similar thing for the the claims space, right, where a lot of those manual activities, right, and especially given the immense amount of data that kind of revolves around a claim that is available, that has been vetted, that insurance companies are using every day, right? And so you're able to kind of anchor to those processes and figure out which pieces of those are kind of very manual today, and actually start there. And then from there, it's kind of, it's been really exponential in terms of everything from kind of corporate functions to underwriting, to even things like, the CAT modeling side, depending on your type of insurance carrier. So it's really kind of grown exponential in terms of number of use cases. It's more around, kind of playing Moneyball and figuring out what's the highest ROI to start with.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Tim. Here's another good one for you, Tim. What is a realistic time frame for implementation?
So this one, it's very use case specific, right? I think
Yeah.
it's one, I think Aaron mentioned it earlier, right? Not everything has to be perfect for use case to be implemented, right? So if you're waiting on perfect data, like Aaron mentioned, it'll likely never happen. So it's more around kind of understanding what the use case is. We've done use cases from a proof of concept perspective in as little as kind of 4 to 6 weeks, and then production and is kind of the 16-week time frame. But it really kind of depends on how many processes you're impacting, how many end users are you rolling it out to, because you also get into especially on the integration side that we talked about earlier. You're typically, if you're actually impacting an end-to-end process, it's not just the AI. The AI is a component, right? But you're also integrating with a source system, so you have those considerations there. You have data kind of on ingest, but also on egress. So I'm ingesting data. The AI is in many cases, and GenAI is producing data of some kind, like a response, or something around the reasoning or task it's completing. And so those data connections, just depending on the organization, or where a lot of time is spent, not just kind of on the AI knowledge piece of it.
Let me just throw in there as well that while I love seeing Tim squirm a little bit about trying to lock him down on what a realistic time frame is, yeah, I think we all have to also realize that part of the implementation is going to be that testing period that's going to be based as well on our risk tolerance. So, depending on what the process is, and, we as the business users are going to have to sit there and say, how much testing, whether it's A/B or side by side or beta testing, how much are we comfortable with before we're able or willing to take it and start rolling it out on a larger scale? So part of that's up to us, right? And also what the project itself is trying to do.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And Aaron, I got a good question for you here. So how can insurers ensure that the data used for training Gen AI agents is unbiased and representative of all customer segments?
Cool. All right. The high level answer is that you have to do things such as do your regular audits of your algorithms for bias. You have to have diverse training data sets. I think I mentioned some of this earlier. The guidelines around fairness and equitable treatment of customers. But I'd recommend both to you who asked this question and everybody else who's interested in more on this topic. The CAS, the Casualty Actuarial Society, actually just published a series of research papers on understanding various types of bias and their relevance to insurance processes. And they even give several bias mitigation methods that you can apply. So I highly recommend that you actually read that research, because there's a lot of good stuff out there on how to take care of that in various circumstances.
Interesting. Interesting. And here's a question, another one for you, Aaron. Someone says, your report on this mentions integrations with existing systems being a challenge. What are ways to overcome this?
Tim, someone read your report. This is awesome. But I fully agree. I mean, we've seen this in surveys that Ernix has done as well. I think it's an important topic, right? AI technologies need to be integrated into existing processes to be effective, period. If your company is not going to integrate them properly, then you can't deliver the expected value. So a lot of companies are finding that they have good ideas and even start building some of these AI models that could bring value, but the cost to integrate them into the processes and the technology, especially when we're talking about some of this inflexible legacy technology, it's just too great. So I've got experience with this problem in my past roles, and it's no fun. I've had data scientists say to me in the past, I've done all these great things, yet they're sitting on a shelf because we just can't afford to put them in place, because the cost to get them into these legacy technologies and get the data out and get them integrated is just too much. So my recommendation is to modernize your technology infrastructure, but do so in a smart fashion. I've heard horror stories from fellow executives about painful, decades-long infrastructure projects. But I've also, on the other side, while at Ernix, I've helped companies modernize key pieces of their technology in very rapid fashion. And these can almost eliminate these AI bottlenecks, I'll say, and lead to you having much faster and immediate value. So that's what I'd recommend in those spaces.
I think the other complicating factor now is that a lot of applications have kind of native AI capabilities that they're trying to implement, and then plus you can have custom AI capabilities, right, that you can embed, right? But I think it's more important to that. It's kind of thinking about it as a holistic user experience, right, and just kind of think about it from the end user perspective, right? Because we've seen situations where somebody has, we'll stick to the chatbot example. They may have a 3 or 4 GenAI chatbots they have open on their Windows, depending what application they have open, right? Which, it just, back to kind of usability and making sure it's kind of just embedded, right? It's almost kind of second nature as part of the process versus something that somebody has to kind of go in and understand and may get confused on what one AI tool is doing versus another, right? So just kind of really thinking about it from a kind of that experience, embedded experience perspective is important.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for all your good questions. Everyone in the audience, we've got time, I think, for one more. So yes, Aaron, let me ask you this, but of course, Tim, chime in. What role would synthetic data play in Gen AI agents?
Ooh, fun question. I wondered if somebody would ask this question. Tim mentioned, building out data and things like that in the past. So I'm glad somebody picked up on that. So synthetic data is a fun topic that we could probably talk for at least another hour on. But let me just mention 2 key ways in which synthetic data can come to play in some of this. Part of it, one of the things is kind of addressing data scarcity. So you can generate synthetic data to fill gaps where some of your real world data is limited and difficult to obtain, especially when we're talking about niche applications or emerging fields or things like that. And the second is all about data privacy. So creating synthetic data sets that resemble your real data, but don't contain PII or the personally identifiable information, organizations can actually use that to train their GenAI agents while ensuring compliance with some of the data privacy regulations we talked about previously, like GDPR and CCPA.
Yeah, and I think especially on the data privacy space, we see organizations that are kind of very sensitive to especially kind of ingesting their real world data into a GenAI agent they may not understand. That's where that synthetic piece really comes into play. And those data, the synthesizing data now has gotten much more sophisticated in the past, and so you can get very creative in terms of feeding it historical data and then synthesizing fake data, right? I can actually even prompt it via language the kind of data and essentially what schema, what format I want it to be in. So you can make it kind of much more real world, much easier now. Whereas in the past that would have taken a long time to do that, but it often is very helpful in terms of the kind of real world scenario testing that we were talking about earlier.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. I think that is a great note to end on. I really appreciate your time. We really kind of dug into this topic, and I think we covered some good ground. And of course, everyone in the audience would not want to do it without you. So thank you for being here and participating in those polls, asking those questions. We will be sending a follow-up email with a recording of this event, so please keep an eye on your inbox. And with that, I will officially wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.